Okay, let's talk about Soldier's Home by Ernest Hemingway. Things that you need to know about Ernest Hemingway, and these are things that will be on the test after spring break. He won the Nobel Prize for Literature in 1954. Now, to explain what the significance is of a Nobel Prize for Literature, if you've heard of the Pulitzer Prize, a Pulitzer Prize is something that a person wins and can win more than one time for a particular work of literature. It's showing excellence for one thing. A Nobel Prize for Literature, and please note that this is the Nobel Prize for Literature. Hemingway didn't win a Nobel Peace Prize. Yes, I've had students make that mistake before. He won this basically because what the Nobel Committee was saying was that his body of work was significant. As a writer, he had written about important issues and made a difference in world literature as a whole. And so it's a pretty big deal for someone to win a Nobel Prize for Literature. He had a strong attachment to Spain and Spanish-speaking countries. If you look at the titles in the next bullet point, you'll see For Whom the Bell Tolls. That was a novel set in Spain dealing with the Spanish Revolution. The Old Man of the Sea is set in Cuba before the time of the communist overthrow there. Hemingway spent a lot of time in Cuba. And The Sun Also Rises, which was set in various places in Europe, but Spain was one of the key places in which it was set. The other novel that I mentioned in this bullet point is A Farewell to Arms, which takes place during World War I, prior to American involvement, and his main character is an American who went to fight in World War I, he actually drove ambulances in World War I before the U.S. was involved, which Hemingway, by the way, himself also did. Hemingway was what we call a man's man. He was pretty, what we would have called a couple of decades back, he was pretty macho. Big game hunter, really into adventure, hard drinker, just, definite testosterone guy here. And some of those adventures led to some major health problems for him, one of which was a plane crash in which he broke nearly every bone in his body. And even though the body healed, and bones do heal, it did leave him with chronic pain for the rest of his life. And it was that chronic pain that he'd been living with for years on top of a cancer diagnosis that led to his suicide in 1961. Ironically, Hemingway's father had also committed suicide, and in fact, an issue that his protagonist in For Whom the Bell Tolls really struggles with is his own father's suicide. And then not only did Hemingway himself end up committing suicide, but so did his granddaughter Margot several decades later. The Soldier's Home is about a man named Harold Krebs who had fought in World War I in Europe, was a part of a regiment that didn't come home until about a year after the war was over. It ended in 1918. He didn't come home until sometime mid-1919. And he finds it very difficult to reintegrate himself into American society. He doesn't really argue with his parents, but he is pretty passive-aggressive about not getting a job, not moving on with his life. They're very concerned about him, but that doesn't seem to make a difference. He's very emotionally detached. At one point, he does say to his mother, when she asks, "Don't you love your mother?" "No, I don't love anyone." He does seem to be a little bit more affectionate with his younger sister, but we've got somebody who is emotionally cut off from basically everything, that's just kind of opted not to feel. And what we would refer to that now is as PTSD, that something happened to him in the war that he does have, and it may be a quiet sort of post-traumatic stress disorder, but there's obviously something wrong with him that changed after he went to war. But back in the time of World War I, people weren't really talking about PTSD. I'm not even sure they knew it was a thing. This is something we can see in retrospect that Harold's family would not have seen at the time. His parents are very frustrated with the fact that he's not getting a job, or by his not getting a job, but they can't get through to him, and they try everything. His father even offers him the use of the car, thinking that might kind of sway him, and we'll talk more about why the car is important later on. And we do see that scene in the story that his mother tries and even asks him to pray with her. She prays for him, and there she prays, and she wants him to pray, and he just says that he can't, and he has made the comment that he's not part of God's kingdom. Again, disconnected from religion as well. He's polite about everything. He's respectful, but just very disconnected. Now, he does promise his mother that he will get a job. But at the end of the story, the way the narrator frames this, he would go to Kansas City and get a job, and it would be all right. intentionally seemingly is framing that in a way that we don't really think Harold's going to do anything. He's just going to keep on drifting, and that there isn't going to be a job in his future, that we don't really know what will happen to him, but that he's never really going to land on his feet and become part of society again. Now, it does mention at the beginning of the story that there's this picture of him as a part of a fraternity when he was in college before he went to war. That's more evidence that something about the war changed him, because he was seemingly a pretty happy frat boy before he went, but he's not that person when he comes home. And he did come home about 2 years later than most soldiers did. My time frame maybe off a little bit there, but there's a lot of time that passes. And when he first comes home, he doesn't want to talk about the war. Then at a point where he's ready to talk, war's old news. Nobody wants to hear war stories anymore. And so he has then reached that point that he has things he needs to talk about, but there is absolutely no one to whom he can talk about them. Literary devices that I want you to look at in this story. First of all, style. Hemingway is very well noted in American literature for his minimalist style. If you look through a lot of the things that he has written, you see a lot of repetition of phrases. You see short, choppy sentences, that you don't get the long, flowing, difficult word vocabulary, those types of things in his writing. It's full of meaning and a lot deeper than it can appear, but if you look at just being able to sit down and read what Hemingway writes, there are a lot of things there that are very simple to at least word call and read aloud. Whether or not there is simple to understand, a little bit different story. Okay, for example, from one section in this particular story, he did not want consequences. He did not want any consequences ever again. He wanted to live along without consequences. Besides, he did not really need a girl. The army had taught him that. It was all right to pose as though you had to have a girl. Nearly everybody did that, but it wasn't true. You did not need a girl. Catch the repetition of need a girl, consequences, very, very short, very choppy. Now, when you look at A Rose for Emily, one of the sentences we're going to look at to show a contrast with Faulkner's style is the opening sentence of A Rose for Emily, and you'll note that here we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 sentences, and you'll see that Faulkner's opening sentence of A Rose for Emily isn't markedly shorter than these 9 sentences are all combined. Next, we'll talk about internal conflict. And of course, an internal conflict is a battle that a person feels within himself or herself. Now, just because Harold's not openly emotional doesn't mean he's not conflicted. He's conflicted about the fact that he is upsetting his parents, especially his mother. He's conflicted about the fact that part of him likes women and would like to have a girl, but he doesn't necessarily want one around all the time, especially an American woman. He thinks American women are too talkative. What's up with that? He's back in the States, yet he doesn't really feel at home. He had made the point that he didn't want to leave Germany. And so there's all sorts of stuff going on within him that is feeling very conflicted, and he does have these battles. And his solution to dealing with the battles is simply to be in denial and not try to deal with it and to shut down. And that leaves symbolism. I mentioned earlier we would come back to the discussion of the car. A symbol is something concrete that represents something abstract. It's not like this is the first time we've had this term this year, but just to make sure we're all good with it. It's using something that you can perceive with your senses to represent something that you cannot. In Harold's case, we have the deal about the car. Car, obviously, is something that takes you places, unless you're sheltered in place and you're not supposed to be going anywhere, but that's besides the point. Anyhow, and in the case of Harold, he's not going anywhere. And his father, who wants him to go somewhere, suggests that to his mother, that Harold use the car, that he can take the car places. In other words, both symbolically and literally, Harold's father's trying to get him to go somewhere. Harold's not that enthusiastic about taking the car. Harold's not that enthusiastic about going anywhere. And so, in both cases, he's being pushed to go, and he's not going. Just in a concrete way with the car, an abstract way in real life. Okay, if you have any questions about the story, just shoot me a message through Remind. This should help you with all the questions that you have on the study guide, as well as